Well, good afternoon. Thank you for sticking with us all day. I appreciate the size of this room. And for my panel, I'm very excited about this panel. I am Lauren Williams, Senior Editor at Defense One, and we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is private capital investment in defense technology. And I have a very esteemed panel to talk about this with us today. And I just want to jump right in so that we can, get to happy hour just a little bit faster. So the first thing I want to start with is, as we see this sort of uptick in private capital, venture capital investment in defense technologies, how is that going to make a difference in what the Pentagon buys and actually what the warfighter actually needs and can use? I'll start with you, Dave.
Great. Well, first off, Lauren, thanks for having us here. It's wonderful to be in front of all of you. When I think about where the Department of Defense can best leverage the venture-backed startup technology, I think first and foremost that the more money you get to throw at the technology and the things that are going to be built for tomorrow, the better off our warfighters are. And quite frankly, while the DoD's budget continues to grow, I think we're going to see an R&D budget of about $140 billion. In reality, that kind of pales in comparison to the amount of R&D that's going on across the commercial sector, that's going on with the venture capitalists, and ultimately that's going to attract the best entrepreneurs that are going to want to build disruptive technology. And so it's less about the DoD sort of dictating the technological trends of tomorrow and better incorporating it into their systems as fast as possible, a la the types of trends that we've seen in Ukraine and Israel, where commercial technology has really come to the forefront in ways that I think we've read about in books and seen in movies, but haven't necessarily experienced in the real world. And I think that is going to continue to help evolve the thinking around how can we best partner.
Yeah, Sarah, I'm looking at you because it's your job to integrate all of these great technologies. So give us your take.
Sure. So as many of you probably are familiar with, DIU, a key piece of our origin story was the recognition that R&D was existing outside of the government, right? It was to take advantage of the private capital that was getting poured behind good operators that wanted to build things to change the way we do business, the way we fight wars, the way we deter wars. So that was a key recognition and why we were founded in 2015. So I would say capital in this space is incredibly important and is good. I've loved watching over the last 5 years how that ebbs and flows. I always love the little anecdotes. Everyone's elbowing in to get in the great deals, the great companies, all good. The piece, though, that concerns me, or the piece that I'm trying to solve for, is the return of all of that, right? At the end of the day, we, the DoD, have to responsibly spend, meaning, are we thinking about problems that the warfighters have in a way that we can solve? Are we framing them in a way that we can solve it with commercial tech? Are we being responsible buyers? Are we providing a big enough piece of the pie? And do we have follow through? Because if the DoD doesn't have that piece, then obviously the capital dries up. So that's the piece I care about the most. Yeah. Love the input, but I've got to figure out the output.
Greg, Susanne.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in government, been in industry, and maybe it makes sense to take a little bit of a step back and look at the entire defense landscape. My best analogy right now for the defense landscape, especially the defense industrial base, is the Game of Thrones. How many people here have read the book series Game of Thrones or watched the TV show? Okay. We're going to go down a geeky journey here for a little while, and hopefully this all makes sense. So the reason why I love the Game of Thrones, it's like the story of betrayal. You have these competing houses that are fighting one another, but the real story of that book series is that there's a real enemy, and it's the White Walkers from the north. And ultimately, the houses have to come together and unite. And when I think of those houses, I think of the traditional primes, I think of the non-traditionals, I think of the consulting firms, I think of the system integrators, I think of the FFRDCs, and I think about private capital. And so I'm going to walk you through my Game of Thrones analogy here really quickly and see if you guys agree with me. So we'll start with the Iron Throne. And Sarah looks like she's kind of sitting in the Iron Throne right now. And
it's a dangerous place.
Only government person here. She represents the Pentagon. The Pentagon is the one that issues the decrees, the allocator of resources. making the decision. Then you have Westeros, which is represented a lot of the companies here. You have some of the primes, you have some of the non-traditionals, those FFRDCs, consultancies, and so on. And then let's just break down each house for a second. My favorite, obviously, is House of Stark. Noble, often underestimated. These are the non-traditionals, right? The Andurils, the Saronics, the Saildrones. These are the folks that are really embracing AI, autonomy, modular architectures. They're the ones that really value, I think, speed is their number one business case. And then you go into House Lannister. These folks are powerful, they're calculating. These are the primes. This is the Lockheed Martin, the BAE, the HII. These folks build exquisite systems, but they're often slow. According to GAO, it takes almost 11 years to go from concept to developing the first capability, but we need these exquisite capabilities, we just need more of them. And then you have House Tyrell. They're shrewd, they're kind of hedging their bets. These are the system integrators, these are the consultants. Most of what they do can be done by ChatGPT for about $20 a month versus the $1 million report. However, they provide an enormous amount of domain knowledge, and if you can link that with great software, you can produce really amazing things. And then you have the maesters, or the masters. These are the folks that are supposed to protect the realm. They're the knowledge folks. They're the ones that are supposed to be the neutral third party. In my mind, these are the FFRDCs, these are the labs. And in theory, they should be kind of the third neutral party. However, they often pick sides. They wind up building software, they build weapon systems, and they start competing with the other houses. They need to go back to just kind of being that third neutral party. And then you have the Iron Bank. And the Iron Bank is helping out, obviously patriotic, but is expecting a return. Right, David?
That's me.
Okay. And then you have the White Walkers. And the White Walkers, in my opinion, are China. You have North Korea, you have Iran, you have Russia. China's obviously the Night King, building in mass, has quantity, has certain economic warfare on us, propaganda warfare. But ultimately, what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to come together and unite. And in my mind, that is where you're having the primes to be able to partner with the non-traditionals. We want the primes to be producing more of their exquisite capabilities. We want them to also be using AI and autonomy in a collaborative way. We want the consultants and system integrators to bring us into the new, but also move away from time and materials contract, more to outcome-based contracts. We want the FFRDCs to actually do what they're supposed to do and not compete with the other houses. And we want this accelerated by bringing in this amazing private capital, not just for their money, but for their expertise and their ability to have a dual-use companies of commercial and defense. And so I just share that because I think it's important to understand kind of the entire landscape, and private capital is a critical part of that, but not the only part of that landscape.
And Susanne, I'm curious
I
about...
don't think I can follow that.
Yeah, you
I think
What is Maxar? Maxar's House Stark.
we do need a
having not
shout out.
that show, I have no idea
Using
if I
Game
agree or
of Thrones,
disagree.
not Lord of the Rings. I mean, I'm kind of proud of you,
Yeah, it
Palantir.
does seem a little
Oh, that's where we originated? I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
having not watched Game of Thrones, I think I got a little lost in your explanation there, Craig.
Went geeky on you.
It's okay, I haven't watched Game of Thrones either. Don't at me.
I don't think I have much to add. It's hard to follow that one.
But from your seat, Maxar has been around for a while, and space-based capabilities are in demand. Of course, we know of the current geopolitical conflicts going on around the world and the importance of, intelligence. So I'm curious, as you guys are backed by private capital, can you talk a bit about that role in this space?
So I work at Maxar. We're a commercial imagery provider, and you've probably seen a lot of our images on the news, right, over the past few days. And it really plays a critical role in national security, as well as, things like disaster relief. And private capital, we're owned by a private equity firm, is critical. It takes investment to launch large, exquisite satellites. It's not something that you can necessarily just start, right? We're launching large satellites. We have 10 high resolution satellites, and it requires that type of investment. And so for us, it's critical in order to be able to provide the services that we're able to provide to the government.
Yeah. One of the things that's come up a couple of times just now is you're talking about return on investment and those margins. But as was mentioned, Greg, that it can take a long time for the DoD to buy things, and technology moves fast. And also those margins can be kind of thin. So tell me a bit about, I guess, the attention span there. Like, do you think, even though there's a lot of fervor and excitement around private backers getting into the defense tech space, how long will that be sustained? Because defense is obviously something that is going to continue to be funded. The budget just came out today. We will be looking at that later, not here, but me personally. Can you just talk a bit about that? Because if you're not getting a return, then
I'd love to.
why?
Yeah, so I think if you're going to invest in a pure defense tech only company, that can be pretty challenging. It is a capped market size, but Greg alluded to, and at Shield Capital, we're pretty focused on investing at that intersection of national security and commercial. So the technology companies that we invest in, we try to be fairly mindful about whether or not the DoD is the right first customer, or do you focus on the commercial sector and come to the DoD later because it's a good secondary or tertiary opportunity. Now, the benefit to the warfighter and the taxpayer should obviously be like economies of scale. I'm probably going to get that widget, that software license for a lot less if my captured opportunity is only the DoD, who then has to bear the full responsibility of the cost. But I think, I'm speaking to probably a pretty savvy inside the Beltway audience. If I get a pitch from a startup and says, like, I'm going to win some of these cost plus contracts and it's going to be a lot of services, okay, private capital is not the right instrument for you. Maybe you get a mezzanine debt bridge loan, but for a VC who's looking for 100x return, so I put in $1 million and I'm hoping to extract 100 million, which means, if at some point you need to be doing over 100 million in annual recurring revenue, if not more, to get over $1 billion valuation. These are firm fixed price type contracts where your margins can be at least 50%, if not, the traditional SaaS 90+%. So that's really like the fixation of how we look at investing in this space. Again, not everything in the DoD is going to be venture backed, but certainly for what I think will be the most compelling technologies of the future that are going to deter our adversaries, if it's not coming from venture backed startup built technology, I don't think the White Walkers are going to hang out on the north side of the wall.
Yeah, I think David brings up such an important point. Like, this is where I wish I worked at IBM when I was 21, so I count that still as being a government employee. And then I joined the government, and then I've come to industry. And David brings up like two really interesting points. One is the government is so afraid of profit margins. The government really is at the altar and worships at the altar of cost reasonableness. And so, like, let me give you a scenario, and this is often real life. If you have a company that's bidding $100 for something and another company for $50, and that company that bid the thing for $50 has an 80% margin, and the thing that did for $100 has a 10% margin, the government actually believes it's getting a better deal on the $100 thing. And it's less risky for them to do the $100 thing because they don't understand how margins work. They think they're getting ripped off. And I think in a lot of ways, we have to weaponize capitalism. I think of my personal life. I buy an iPhone. Don't care if Apple is making 90% margins on that. I find a certain value of that. And if they provide me value and deliver what I'm looking to deliver, they should get the appropriate return. And then by getting that appropriate return, Apple's investing that back into better capability for me to be able to get. And so we need to really embrace capitalism. If we're really what we're fighting for is Western values, let's embrace one of the key things that's made this country, I think, incredible. There's faults with capitalism, but I can't think of a better alternative. The other thing that David said that I thought was fascinating, just getting to hang out with a lot of VC and PE guys, is they're incredible matchmakers. Like, the government will issue a requirement, it'll speak in weird language. Usually the same cast of characters of the defense industrial base will bid on something. But David's real skill set, in my opinion, is he knows the commercial sector and he can start seeing what would actually be applicable that no one might have thought about into defense. And so those guys are some of the best matchmakers that I've ever seen. The last thing I'll just quickly say, the PBB process does everyone know the PBB process, planning, programming, budgeting, execution? It is a true national security risk. Like, it is the craziest thing. Like, it values conformity, central planning. It is a Soviet era communist style way to do business. And we're like not very good communists, so it doesn't work very well. One of the things that we need to do is not just close the kill chain, it's really closing the cash chain. And what I mean by that is we need to allocate resources effectively. We need to kill things that aren't working and apply that funding to things that actually are, and so we can actually make these investments happen. And we need to invest in things that are actually winning and giving some of these new entrants. We will win by using our American industrial base and putting that into the defense industrial base. That's the only way we'll win as a nation.
I want to get
Just DIU's whole mission.
Before I go to everybody else, I want to push on what you said, because, I guess it's not that I care that Apple makes 90% profit, but like, what about waste, fraud, and abuse? Because when we're talking about public funds, we're talking about taxpayer dollars. And then, and there's been multiple examples from, you got you have TransDigm, you have Lockheed, there are lots of cases that show that contractors have overcharged.
And those were on cost plus contracts.
Yeah. So I mean,
they were because if you're doing cost plus, you are highly incentivized to increase costs because it's a ratio tied to revenue is how much profit you get. And so you don't really inject a ton of competition because and again, I was a former acquisition officer. So from a technical evaluation, I am just trying to get the lowest price technically acceptable. And as long as I can adjudicate your labor costs accordingly, and assuming I know what the difference between like a level 1 and a level 2 software engineer is, again, on the commercial side, it is just like, are you building something that customers want and are willing to pay for? And I think what we can do better in the Department of Defense is, instead of doing a long, protracted proposal development cycle and then picking somebody based on paper drills, bring them out to the test range, and whoever performs the best, because they got investment to underwrite the R&D and now they can provide a joyful experience to the end user, that's your winner. And it's real competition. But Sarah, you maybe have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, very much agree. In terms of how do we get tech into the hands of folks sooner so we can adjudicate, evaluate. This gets back to open dagger work at CDAO, something DIU is thinking about right now as well. And go back just 3-4 years, DIU's application of the OTA through our CSO process, of which this guy created, it was a great process. However, we were really confined to what was put on a sheet of paper. Right? At the end of the day, you could have met with 50 companies in a market space, had really good understanding of where their products were at, what the roadmap looked like, and had pretty strong perspective going in. That company comes in, submits a pitch deck, what looks like a pitch deck, but was supposed to index heavily on where is the product at and where would it go and how does it solve our problem? Because again, we're posting problem statements, not requirements. Traditionally, we are. They come in, and then folks that maybe didn't see that company or just want to stare at one sheet of paper, they're like, oh, nope, that company doesn't mean anything. You're like, hold on, that's a category leading solution. We need to hear from this company. So there's flaws in every single process. So I think the sooner that we can get good tech, even if it's not at the maturity that we need, into an environment, ATO the thing quick, pump operational data in, let's validate, see if it solves our problem, then we can be a more informed buyer.
I think that's best for the companies too, right? Like if you're a good company and a competitive company, you should be able to produce good products and win at competitions. And I think that's motivating for companies to engage in that sort of environment.
We've mentioned it a little bit, but I want to get your thoughts on the role of, I guess, traditional prime contractors. One thing that I've noticed is, you have more, I would say, non-traditional defense companies like leading contracts like Palantir, like Anduril, and you have some of the more legacy companies kind of taking, I don't want to say a back seat, but that's my term, I'll say a back seat, to letting more software, AI-driven companies drive programs. Where do primes fit into this landscape and in terms of like working with these sort of private-backed tech companies? Jump ball.
I'll start. I mean, one of the best people that ever worked for me, Kate Seavey from Lockheed right now, the primes have to do well. And the primes are a really important part of the narrative. I mean, I think of, the last few months here and every major conflict. I mean, you have what occurred with Iran, right? That was a B-2 and it was a bunker bomb, right? Those are exquisite capabilities. If you look at what happened with Ukraine with Operation Spiderweb, you still then have the drones that were, hundreds of thousands of dollars, being able to take out $7 billion of capability on Russian tarmacs. If you look at what Israel has, you have Iron Dome, you have David Sling, you have F-35s, but you also have cheap drones. You need both of these things to be successful. I think we need actually more of the exquisite capabilities. We need more of the non-traditional autonomy. We need more of the AI. In a world of great power competition, the answer is all of the above and more of it. This isn't 20 years ago where we are the dominant world power and we understand the current world order. So my answer is like more of everything. Now, with that said, I also think, I think the primes sort of caused this themselves, and some will say the government did it, but I do think we need to encourage a better business model for the primes. As David said with the cost plus contract, if we can make it more easy for them to be able to make certain margins and to give better requirements, I do think it helps the primes out tremendously. And I think what you're seeing in the market right now is the Andurils are partnering with the primes. We're partnering with all the primes right now using software to be able to help with the manufacturing process to build more things. And so I think the answer is yes, they're extremely important. Yes, they should actually have a bigger presence and they should be producing more things. But how do we get them to operate with the rest of the ecosystem? And how does the government help them change their business model so they're not driven to some of this bad behavior? And in return, these companies are going to have to be less CFO-centric and more founder-centric and get to some of the outcomes that we're looking for.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Greg. I feel like even a few years ago, it felt very, okay, you had the startups versus the primes, and now there's this real wide spectrum of companies out there. And Palantir is no longer a startup, right? When I joined, we very much were a 400-person startup, and since I've left, it's really now a software prime. And it takes all of these different companies, and in the end, it's really how do they work together? How are contracts written so that the types of contracts encourage companies to bring good solutions together? How are tech solutions interoperable so that you can bring AI into an exquisite platform? So I think it's more about sort of how that all puts together than companies versus other types of companies.
Personally, I think there's so much potential here. It's an area, just last week I hired someone specific within our funder team just to look at the primes and how we partner with them better. The primes, every time we chat with them, kind of primes, CSPs, that's like big folks that maybe don't check the box as a non-traditional and therefore don't come through our CSO process, though it's worth noting, 12% of the contracts we cut do go to those companies. So probably every prime at this point is one DIU contract. But that aside, what they want to know is the market perspective that we have, the companies that we have on contract, who's performing great, who can they partner with for future go-to-market opportunity? And that type of information, our portfolio companies are more than happy for DIU to share that. They're performing well. But they're looking for that partnership as well for all the reasons that were just stated. So DIU is hoping to, at least by vision with hiring someone to focus on just this, is let's grow that connected tissue. I think there's a ton more to do there. The one thing though we're kind of seeing live, which I think is a funny anecdote that I thought might be good to share here, DIU predominantly uses OTAs, right? Prototype OTAs in particular. We don't even write production OTAs. But one thing that is interesting that we see when we run a program or we go to transition a prototype to production, and we're working at the program office, and they've got a production OT, they've never used one before, and we're there kind of coaching them. You'll see an interesting thing from both sides. From the program office side, you'll see a bunch of DFARS clauses being inserted. They're trying to make that OTA look like a FAR. And from the vendor side, and this one happened to be a prime, so I'm bringing it up, they're redlining all the T's and C's to make it look like a FAR, right? And we're like, hold on, guys, stop. This was an OTA. We didn't have to make these edits from both sides. So I think there's a massive cultural piece that we need to overhaul, we need to fix, as all of us have kind of echoed. But all in all, I think there's tons of partnership, and I think the primes are hungry for it, and I'm excited to see what that brings.
I want to follow up on that, and now I'll start with you, Susanne, on this. How easy is it to work with DoD? I mean, Sarah just gave us an example of how there's like a mismatch, but especially when you're talking about the increased use and buying of, space capabilities, space intelligence. What are you seeing from your seat? What's your experience?
Yeah, I would start by saying, working with DoD, it's not really a monolith, right? Like there's all different parts, all different agencies we work with, offices within those agencies, and they can all be a bit different in terms of how effective those partnerships are. There's sort of the obvious things that can make it challenging to work with the government, clearances and ATOs and networks and things like that. But I think it comes down to sort of who's embracing commercial technologies and how are they acquiring those. So, for Maxar, for example, we've worked closely with Space Force. They've got some new programs like TAC SRT that they're bringing commercial space capabilities to. So there's some places where we see a lot of openness to commercial capabilities, and then there's others where there's just honestly a lot of cultural inertia, and especially in the space world where there's these exquisite systems that take 10 years to build and cost billions of dollars. There's a lot of inertia to keep those going versus buy new capabilities. So it's really about like the pockets that we work with and who's open to bringing on new innovation, I think.
Yeah, I think this question is like you have to put it in perspective. So, and Susanne knows this story better than I do, but if you look at Palantir's journey 20 years ago, it like had to, beg and plead just to get into the Pentagon or talk to anyone or talk to users, and InQtel was probably the only thing that kind of saved it and got legitimacy. Now I feel like everyone in the Pentagon has some tech background, and everyone is talking about tech and the non-traditionals and bringing Silicon Valley into defense. If we look at private capital, and David will have the stat better than I do, but like the last 3 years, I think it's been 145 billion. The 10 years prior to that was about the same amount. So it's significantly improved. I'll say something controversial. I actually worry a little bit that the innovation labs are actually hurting the transition to make it easier for defense to do business. And the reason why I say that is there's actually very little money in the innovation units. And I think a lot of the traditional PEOs sort of think of those innovation units and they kind of got that and they still are the door. I think we've moved beyond that. And I think we need to move the innovation units into the PEOs and institutionalize this thinking much faster to where the money actually is and where the capabilities are actually being delivered. And so to me, almost like a lot of what has been done and is sort of like mission success. Like, Sarah has done an amazing job at DIU. Let's make DIU now equal a PEO. Like that just should be how we do business. Hopefully that made sense.
It does. David, what are your thoughts?
I would say it's very challenging still. At the end of the day, like the bureaucracy, and Susanne talked about, it's not a monolith. There's a lot of factions within the DoD with their own cultures and buying practices. I'd go even a step further. It's actually about individuals, and those individuals actually matter a lot. So when we invest in a startup, we're trying to figure out who is the champion that actually that wants to carry forward and sort of rip and replace the inertia that exists, because to move and do something new inside the Department of Defense, there's a lot of people that can say no. There's very few people that can say yes. And to get the no's to just shut up, it takes a lot of like a long ground game, because they're culturally just afraid of that change. And so really it's If I'm going to invest in a technology and they're going to enter into the Department of Defense, who is that user champion screaming, I must have this, and is willing to run through walls? Because the system as it's designed today is still not really ready to move. And a lot of it has to do with the budgeting process. A lot of it has to do with the way that the acquisition professionals were trained, where I still don't think they really talk about the value of private capital and what that means for the transformation of technology and how that can actually exist in your day-to-day life. So still a lot of work to be done.
Add something.
Absolutely.
As someone who's like always thinking through, how do we do this at scale? Whether it's this, BD, you've got to get access to the building, you got to know the right doors to knock on. That's not democratized. There's tons of good tech across this country, across the globe, that we want to buy that doesn't know the playbook, that didn't hire the ex-soft dude and doesn't have the lobbying firm on at $15K a month retention. Like, only a few companies are going to win if that playbook is so challenging to get your hands on and then interpret. So democratizing that is something we've thought a lot about at DIU, and I would say since implementing the CSO process, the next biggest thing, and I'm biased, but the next biggest thing was us launching an operating team in the last fall of 24, focused on what are those systemic barriers that all of our companies face. Doesn't matter if you're Raytheon, Google, or insert cool startup here. All those companies are facing the same challenges. And for each of those challenges, where is DoD, specifically DIU, or our partners in the department, in a good position to put our hands on the scale to decrease something? So the private sector can't fix it from the outside. Some of those big things we've already mentioned, getting into SCIFs, getting FCLs in weeks instead of 12 to 18 months. How do we get folks into SCIFs? When we put them on contract, they get their 254, they got their FCL, their PCLs, they're already got nowhere to go actually build the thing. ATOs, that's just, we've got to get there faster. Range space, like there's so many things in this space that DIU is now getting after in a very real way. And we've launched this operating platform with products for our portfolio companies to start. This is still government. You've got to pilot things, show other people that you can reduce barriers in this way. But we definitely have the vision of expanding this for the betterment of the entire ecosystem, hopefully in the next 1 to 1.5 years. But so trying to bring the barriers down, but they're massive and got to democratize along the way.
Can you say a little bit more or give an example of these sort of services? Because I'm especially in the secured space.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that watch budgets closely, DIU had an interesting mark in the 25 budget. We were given $45 million to fix the classified infrastructure as a service space. Everything's as a service. So kind of in that veil, I always think about what does a company first need, right? They need that FCL. To get that FCL, we, DIU, any of your CDAO, right? We issue these 254s. Companies got to fill it out. If a company takes any degree of misstep there, they call it Pearson LLC on page 3, Pearson Inc. LLC. That would make sense. But something else, that package goes to various agencies, but let's say DCSA, then it goes back to the bottom of the stack, right? And so like these issues of things taking too long, sometimes due to human error, a lot of times on the vendor side, a lot of times due to process error and inefficiency, we're streamlining. So for example, we've put a company on contract that is, in essence, a fractional FSO for our portfolio companies. So our companies don't need to worry about that process at all. We will give them for free an FSO for 12 months. That's going to help shepherd them through that. In conjunction, we have worked with our DCSA counterparts, are working, it's continuous, always evolving, but working with them to make sure that we can help reduce the timelines they have by being more efficient in FOCI reviews, something that most organizations inside DoD do anyways before they put a company on contract. Well, let's share our research, check the box and move on and not talk about it for 9 months for a clean company that has no risk whatsoever. So there's kind of one way we're bringing the FCL timeline way down. I'm very excited. And then the bigger piece for classified infrastructure as a service, hit it fast and overcover it, is, how do we take a model where there are SCIFs, varying levels, not just TS, how do we take spaces and open it up to vendors that have a contract, have a need to be there, but want to hop in, check SIPR for one thing, and then go jump TS, go SAP, like we'll go to different levels here. But we've got to solve that problem. We can't keep having defense tech, we can't keep having startups that are leveraging their reservists, their military reservists on staff to beg, borrow, and steal access to SCIFs so they can get their code into something. That's, again, not democratized, not scalable. So one area that we're getting after.
I want to look forward a bit at future investments. As we said at the top, there's a lot going on in the world, and that's going to affect official budgets, like the one that came out today, and it's also going to affect investments from private capital and company investments. So I want to go down the line and tell me what these events or what the current environment, how that's shaping the investment outlook in defense tech. So I'll start with you, David.
Sure. I did want to make one correction for the record. While Sarah tried to give me a lot of credit on the CSO, the real creator of the CSO, Lauren Daly, I was there on the founding team, definitely have my fingers on it, but Lauren Daly, she is the creator. So I just want a correction for the record. Okay, technology areas that I am super excited about. So some of them are just like happening in real time. We had a company that launched on Transporter 14 just 2 days ago. They're going to be performing rendezvous proximity operations and docking, and all of this is going to help just drive down the cost to operating in space, because the more that we can do that, the better off that community will be, the more that we can start to close a lot of these business models, and who knows, maybe one day things that are super expensive and energy inefficient here on Earth can actually be done in space, which will just be great for humanity, society, etc. And this company is called Starfish, and they're just doing wonderful things and excited for their trajectory. As far as like a technology area that I don't know a lot about, but every time I read, I'm just like more and more fascinated and thinking like, man, we have this critical mineral problem that we can't seem to get out from under. How about biomanufacturing? And I know like right now, like from a scalability, it's hard, so the economics don't quite work, but gosh, I think there's a lot of ripe opportunity, again, to end a lot of these different conflicts around resources where people can just be doing things in their own backyard. And again, better for the environment, better for society. I'm really excited about that. Sarah.
Let's take that question slightly differently. Because we are not making direct investment. Instead, we bring needs right across the DoD, IC, bring them to the table and find good commercial capabilities. When I think about the budget from a DIU perspective, I think you'll see kind of three key themes there. First, DIU will continue to play in curating new programs. Like, that is important. It's important that we've got customers across the COCOMs and all the right spots, but we need to grow our customer base with the PEOs. 100% correct. Like, that transition is still the North Star. The metric is not where I think any of us are really think there's growth, there's opportunity. So curating programs, especially within our kind of AI portfolio, autonomy space would be our heavy hitters there. You think about DIU's portfolios. The second thing I think a lot of budget will go to is keeping programs in flight. We talk about value of death, how hard it is, all the things. Something that we piloted last year with $24 is for the prototypes that were in flight that were really successful and all the right I's were dotted in terms of collaboration with customers and the PEOs, et cetera, but the money is not there to transition that yet. We will continue to keep those things in flight. So we're kind of artificially creating a bridge across the valley for successful prototypes. We'll see funding continue to go there. And then the last thing, and this really excites me, I believe DIU was built to push the boundaries for the DoD. Like, I don't actually think we should be an OTA shop, a prototyping shop at all. Love what Greg was saying. Kind of how do we push the envelope for the next thing? Where do we need to go lead, take on risk, mitigated, measured risk, insert whatever word here. Where can we do that so the rest of the folks can follow suit the way that they did with the CSO? Like the swap, everything swap, memo, EO, buy commercial, software should be OTA, firm fixed price, all these things we've been doing for a decade, and others, people, obviously, we didn't create this. But I want to do more of that, kind of how do we push the boundaries? And I think a key piece will be around how do we actually transition so the services have just something to sustain. So we'll see what comes there.
Yeah. No, I think Sarah's exactly right. The one thing that I'm the most obsessed with right now, I think, when I think about Russia and Ukraine, when we go to tech conferences, everyone just talks about the AI autonomy story. Really, that story is one of the same of World War II. Mass matters, quantity matters. If I think of China, they just have more people, they have more equipment, they have more manufacturing capability, they can outproduce us in chips 200 to 1. I want us to go back to the future. I want America to reindustrialize again. I want it to be a great manufacturing nation. And so the thing that we're obsessed with at Palantir right now is how do we use software, which we're still and AI, which we're still the best at in the world, and actually make us, since I can say this in this administration, great again at manufacturing, would be my goal, because I don't care actually about 5 to 10 years from now. I care about 2 years from now. And if we cannot build mass, we will not be able to deter, let alone overwhelmingly defeat our adversaries.
When I think about the budget and kind of the landscape, you talked about the EOs. There's a lot of the, buy not build mentality, this embracing of commercial technologies, which is really exciting. And I think, something that from Palantir's perspective and others, like we've been pushing for many years, and it's good to see a lot of those tides turning. I would say from a Maxar perspective, unfortunately, we are also hearing that there could be up to a 30% cut in commercial imagery next year. And so, there's a dichotomy there of investment in commercial capabilities and also potential cuts to things that have a real mission impact of our warfighters, on operations, on safety of navigation and charts and maps that are being used in the field, or FEMA doing disaster recovery. And so that's maybe not the positive version that you might want to end on, Lauren, but for me that's really top of mind right now from a budget perspective.
It is, even though I would love to pull on that some more, it is a great place to end because it's completely relevant to everything that's going on today. And I want to thank each of you, Susanne, Greg, Sarah, David, thank you so much for being here. This was a great discussion that I would love to keep going. But unfortunately, we have to turn it over. But this is a great, ever-evolving space that everybody here should definitely keep an eye on. But again, thank you for the great discussion. I'm going to turn it over. This is our final panel of the day, but next up is Sean Applegate from Swish. He's going to close us out, and he is going to usher you into happy hour, okay? Thank you all.